Hello everyone, and welcome to Balquell's Books. This is Balquell, and by this, I mean me. Welcome to my pleasure dome. Today we are discussing the works of Herman Hesse, in particular the novel Steppenwolf, published in the year 1927, but we are going to be looking at a few themes that run through this novel that are carried forward from his earlier work, particularly Demian, published in the year 1919. Herman Hesse is a German author who is most known in outside of Germany for his later novels, beginning with Demian in 1919. His novels are sort of extremely personal, introspective looks at individuals dealing with problems of religion, philosophy, and how to become the person that you are. They were extremely influential in the U.S. in the 1960s during the sort of countercultural movement. I think nowadays there's a bit of an impression of a bit of hippie culture has sort of rubbed off on the reputation of Herman Hesse, but I think there is a sort of depth and relevance to these novels that are not quite as dated as some of the sort of more hippy-dippy stuff that was coming out back then. While I particularly want to talk about Steppenwolf, which is my favorite of his novels, I think you really can't get at Steppenwolf in the way that you want to without the background of Demian. I think these works form a sort of duology in a sense. He did write a novel in between, Siddhartha, which is probably his most popular novel. Not my favorite, not bad. But I think these two works really fit together in quite an interesting way. Demian is the story of a young man named Emile Sinclair, and it sort of follows his life from basically when he's a young child up until a young adult. And it's a coming-of-age story of a particular kind. The novel begins with a dichotomy. The very first chapter is entitled Two Worlds. And basically, Emile, as a child, comes up with this conception of reality in which there are two worlds, a light world and a dark world. And the light world is essentially polite bourgeois society. It's the things that we express out in the open, the things that are immediately apparent, and the things that we will show to each other. Whereas the dark world is the hidden world. It's the world of the servants. It's the world of the lower classes. It's the world of crime and all these things, these feelings that we keep bottled up inside of ourselves. It's important to note that this distinction is not a good world and an evil world. While morality can play a part in what is considered light world and dark world, it's not the fundamental distinction here. The fundamental distinction is that which is disclosed and that which is hidden. So the polite bourgeois society has an ideal of morality, presents itself as a moral world, but in it it is not a moral world. There are immoral acts taking place, they're just presented as if they're okay. Similarly, in the dark world, while there is crime and there is sin involved in this world, it's not the focal point of it. The focal point is that it is hidden. So we have the disclosed world, the light world, and the hidden world, which is the dark world. This dichotomy, although it occurs to Emile Sinclair as a child, it is a very important concept for occult or esoteric or hermetic traditions. Within their philosophy and their cosmology, there is the disclosed world, which is the world that everybody knows about. It's the world of all the things we see. And then there is a hidden world that contains the truth, a deeper truth than you're able to attain in the light world itself. And this hidden truth is only available to those who are either chosen to be included I'm forgetting the word when you go through a rite or a ritual and now you're allowed into this world. There's a word for that. I don't remember what it is. Um, or for those with the gall or the audacity to go seeking for this disclosed truth. And this is more the case in Demian. Emile Sinclair is a seeker. He wants to find this disclosed world. He has a fascination with this hidden knowledge, with this idea that that which he sees on the surface cannot be the whole truth. And throughout the novel, Emile Sinclair, while trying to discover this hidden world, is at the same time discovering the truth of himself. So the individual, Emile Sinclair, is a sort of microcosm of the nature of reality. Just as the real world has a light world, in the novel it's bourgeois, German middle-class society, and a hidden world, which is poverty and lower classes. Within Emile, there is the light world of that which he can share with the world and that which he can show, his outward personality. And then there is a hidden world, which is all the feelings that are welling up within him that he is unable to express, either due to fear or just an inability to understand them enough to express them to another person. So throughout the novel, Emile is latching on to certain concepts and certain people in order to discover himself and discover the truth. And he gets obsessed with lust, with beauty, with religion, with music, with esoteric philosophies, sort of one after the other, pushing himself into these worlds. And in each case, he discovers a part of the truth. In each case, there's usually a person or an idea of a person who is pulling him through, who he's trying to get closer to. But at the end of the day, there's a certain point at which he realizes that this person cannot tell him who he is. This person can't get him to do the truth. And he needs to move on, to break free from the level he's at and move on to the next thing. Throughout this all, there is an enigmatic friend of his, or a sort of, not necessarily a friend, just a strange figure in his life named Max Damian. Max Damian is a slightly older boy who transfers to Emile Sinclair's school, and Emile feels this attraction to him, this fascination to him that he just cannot understand. And this fascination takes the form of lust and sexual attraction. It takes the form of romance. It takes the form of aspiration that he wants to be Max Damian. And it takes the form of a mentor-mentee relationship. It's a very free-flowing and ambiguous sort of relationship that Sinclair develops with Max Damian, sometimes without Damian even being aware or involved in any sense. And Damian is that kind of final goal, that final truth. Emile believes that Damian has this understanding of himself that Emile wishes to achieve. But Damian can't tell Emile Sinclair who Emile is. He only knows who Damian is, right? So Emile has to figure out for himself, using Max Damian as a role model. Max Damian is the sort of central ambiguity of the novel. He is a somewhat shadowy figure. You can't quite pin him down. You can't quite understand what he is, who he is. Is he even a real guy? Like, whether he's just part of Sinclair's imagination or his fancy. This central ambiguity is what makes Damian such an interesting novel. So when we move on to Steppenwolf, what carries forward is this dichotomy, the hidden and the disclosed, this splitting the world into two parts. In Steppenwolf, we are dealing with a much older character. The main character, Harry Haller, is 50 years old, or just about 50 years old. He's a few years away from his 50th birthday. And he has, unlike Emil Sinclair, he has a history. He has a sort of scholarly or academic career of some sort that has fallen to pieces, and now he is an isolated individual. He feels himself not to be a part of society, not fixed in a certain location, but basically wandering the world and sort of floating through the world as a non-entity. Part of the reason for this is a sort of innate desire for isolation, an innate misanthropy and hatred of other people and the modern world. But part of it is also society rejecting Harry himself. During the war, the First World War, Harry published a series of journals or essays about his pacifistic stance. He was anti-war, and this was a very unpopular position to take, and it led to him being essentially blacklisted by polite and academic society. You will find that this, among other aspects of Harry Haller's character, is directly analogous to Herman Hesse himself. Herman Hesse was anti-war, he was a pacifist, and people were not pleased with him because of that fact. So although Steppenwolf is a lot older, he has a similar lack of understanding towards himself, a similar confusion. By the end of Demian, there's a sense that Emil is on the path to discovering himself, that there is a hope in the future that he will achieve perfect understanding. In Steppenwolf, we're joining way later in the story, and that never happened. Harry Haller is still very confused about his own nature, and because he's confused, he simplifies it, and he chooses to think of himself as two beings. The first is Harry Haller, the human being and the scholar. He is still attached to his position as an academic. He's still attracted to knowledge, to education. He loves classical music and not modern music, which would be jazz at the time. He likes classic literature. He loves these 18th century authors, Jean-Paul and Novalis, who were sort of Enlightenment German authors of the 18th century. These are old-fashioned ideas, right? And he thinks that this position of him gives him a certain nobility, a certain loftiness that puts him above other people, and this explains his isolation. At the same time, there's another side of him, and this is the Steppenwolf, or the Wolf of the Steppes, the Great Eurasian Plateau. And this wolf is all in Harry that is bestial, all that which doesn't care about these books, that just wants to get drunk, just wants to commit violence, wants to be an individual. And is not loftier and higher than everyone else, but actually lower, actually just this terrible being that has no place in the world. And in his mind, these two are essentially swapping places constantly throughout his life. That at one point he's a wolf, and then the next he's a human being again. While he's a wolf, he can't fully be the wolf because he still feels the human side of him looking down, this elite academic part of him looking down and seeing how debased his actions are and his feelings are, and not accepting them. But while he's a human, he can feel the Steppenwolf in the back saying, what are you doing? All this is nonsensical. All this is stupid. We need to go run free in the world and eat a deer or whatever wolves do, right? We need to lose this veneer of nobility, of respectability, and delve into our passions. And Harry Haller is unable to fully be either of these two people, and unable equally to reconcile them within himself. And this is the central conflict within Harry Haller. At the beginning of the novel, he thinks this dichotomy itself is the problem. He thinks he's the only person who has a wolf and a person in him, and that's his problem, right? But early on in the story, he starts to realize that it's actually his invention of the dichotomy itself that is the problem, that he is attempting to simplify it in order to feel like he understands it, and also to introduce a sense of fatality, a sense of fatalism. Well, I can't be a normal guy because I'm a wolf and a guy, and I can't be a normal wolf because I'm a guy and a wolf, right? So Harry Haller is attempting to explain his position, his misanthropy, his alienation, in such a way that he can't do anything about it. And this is what he's accepted. He's actually saying, I'm not made for this world. It's not okay for me to be here. And at the beginning of the novel, he decides, I'm gonna kill myself. This just isn't working, right? But he's afraid. He's afraid to kill himself. And I think this fear comes from this knowledge that he still doesn't understand himself. He still hasn't acknowledged the reality of his situation. And he can't die without knowing who he truly is. Similar to Emile Sinclair, Steppenwolf needs a muse. He needs someone to pull him into a new world. He can't take the step by himself. Just like Emile follows Demian and then later falls in love with this woman he doesn't know, and then later starts hanging out with this weird organist / philosopher guy. Steppenwolf needs to find a person to drag him back into the world and to teach him about himself. And the person he finds is a young woman named Hermione. Hermione is a prostitute, and maybe a courtesan would be a kindlier way to put it. She basically hangs out with men and gets them to buy her stuff and to pay her to hang out and have sex with them. And she develops a certain sympathy for Steppenwolf. She realizes how pitiable and miserable a creature he is, and within her, she has her own miserableness, her own wretchedness, her own feeling of isolation from other people, and so the two start to connect in this way. She takes the role of a teacher, a mentor to Harry Haller. I think I told him Steppenwolf earlier. Harry Haller. She takes on a sort of mentor role. She brings him in and she says, I'm going to teach you how to dance. I'm going to teach you how to enjoy modern music in the modern world and show you the joy that there is to be found in life. And Harry Haller is reluctant because the wolf says no, the academic says no, but there's some part of him that is so desperate that he's willing to go along with it. Throughout the course of this relationship and the course of the novel, he starts to understand that there are not two selves, that there is a gigantic multitude of selves within him, that his goal is not to discover the one person that he is, but to come to terms with the infinite amount of people he could be, and stop trying to constrain himself within a single personality, but instead to let the essence of himself shine forth in his life. This is the central journey that he's going on throughout the novel. Now, Hermione herself has certain resemblances to Demian that I think are quite interesting. So in Demian, Max Damian is often an androgynous figure. Or rather, not Damian himself, But Emile Sinclair's conception of Demian includes both female and male aspects. When Emile Sinclair, midway through the novel, falls in love with this girl he knows literally nothing about, whose name is Beatrice, he basically like sees her on the street once and decides he's in love with her, and then just imagines, what she could be, uses her as an ideal for beauty and aesthetic and moral virtue, right? When he attempts to paint Beatrice, he ends up discovering in her something of Demian. That the image of Beatrice and the image of Demian are somehow not even connected, but almost interposed on top of each other. That Demian is not only a symbol, as he thinks to this point, he's not only a sort of masculine figure, an aspirational figure, but there's also a feminine side of it, which relates to, there's obviously homosexual feelings that Emile has for Max Damian, but it's not as simple as that Emile is gay and he doesn't know it, but that these feelings come from something deeper than sexuality itself, something even more innate than that. Similarly, Hermione in Steppenwolf has this resemblance to a childhood friend of Harry Haller's, whose name was Herman. And at certain times when Harry Haller looks at Hermione, he sees Herman there, like one of his earliest childhood friends, who he clearly had deep feelings for. And later on in the novel, Hermione even dresses as a man at a party. And because it's 1920s, they can't, when she's dressed as a man, they can't dance together, they can't share any sort of romantic or sexual outward expressions of romance or sexuality. And so they find means of expressing these in a male-to-male context, right? That there is this connection being made between male-to-male friendship and romance, right? That these two are operating on similar levels, that there's a similar type of desire or relationship or companionship to be found in these two types of incredibly deep relationship. And actually we see something of this outside of Hermann Hesse in Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, which is a contemporary German novel, I believe published around the late 1910s, early 1920s. And in that novel, too, our main character, Hans Castorp, the main love interest in that, reminds him of his first childhood friend. There's something going on there. I mean, obviously these two authors are reading each other. So there's something going on there in this sort of, early 20th century German society that within these authors trying to understand a certain homoeroticism, a certain homosexual tendency, and conceptualizing it through heterosexual relationships. Very interesting. The last concept I want to get into related to Steppenwolf is the immortals. So Harry Haller discovers this idea of the immortals, and these are essentially geniuses of philosophy and literature and music. The two examples that are most prominent in the novel are Goethe, the 18th century German novelist slash philosopher slash playwright slash statesman, a huge looming figure in German intellectualism. And the other one is Mozart, who was a genius of music. And both of them have this impression for Harry Haller that they are beyond the world. That while other people other artists are operating within the constraints of reality, within the constraints of the world, these two are past all that. It's not about reputation. It's not about leaving a legacy. For them, as immortals, eternity is real. And that they don't care what's going on now. They don't care what's going on in the future. They don't care what happened in the past. They're everywhere. And their work is everywhere at once. It's not constrained by temporality. This comes to a head at one point. Harry Howler visits an old academic friend of his who doesn't realize that Harry Howler has been sort of blacklisted. And while he's visiting their house and chatting with the husband and his wife, Harry Howler starts to realize, like, well, these people are in a completely different world than I'm in. They're really stuck into this polite bourgeois society. They're repressed. They're not able to express what they truly believe. They just go along with what's going on in society. And the example of this is that this friend of his, though he's an academic, though he's an intellectual, he's carried forward, he's been carried along into this very militaristic German ideal of the time, this patriotic militarism, even though he can't intellectually sort of explain it, right? And they have a portrait in their house of Goethe. But this portrait of Goethe presents Goethe himself as a bourgeois man, as the ideal of this polite society's idea of nobility. And Harry Howler finds this disgusting, because to him, Goethe represents something way greater. He sees in Goethe someone who also has a bit of the wolf in him, who also has this viciousness, who has this complexity, who has this misanthropy, who has this misery, that all this is contained within Goethe, and that he is being simplified into this very respectable portrait is disgusting to him. And he chooses to express this, because he realizes at this point that he's not going to get along with these people. And he chooses to finally say what he feels, and say, what a disgusting portrait of Goethe. I can't believe someone would make this. But of course, these two people have this portrait of Goethe in their house, so clearly they like it. So this is his final sort of rejection of polite society, saying, I'm not going to, say what is going to make people happy, but I'm just going to say whatever I think. Is that a good idea? Who knows? Anyway, later on in a dream and in a strange sort of surrealistic sequence that makes up the ending of the novel, Harry Howler gets to meet Goethe and he gets to meet Mozart. And in both cases, what strikes him the most is their laughter, their lack of seriousness. Harry Howler is incredibly serious about himself. He almost refuses to have fun, refuses to enjoy himself, refuses to lose himself at any point. He's always extremely conscious of himself. He's extremely conscious of what he's trying to be, what he thinks he is, and whether what he's currently doing fits into his conception. That's why he has the wolf and the guy. When he's a guy, the wolf is watching. The wolf is the sort of self-consciousness, saying, well, a wolf would never do something like this. Like, this doesn't fit my conception of the Steppenwolf. But when he's being the Steppenwolf, the human guy is in the back saying, that's not what a human guy would do. That's not what an academic, a noble, literate man would do. He'd do something different. He wouldn't be so bestial and terrible. So it's this self-consciousness that is constantly keeping Harry Howler constrained. And the self-consciousness can only be lost through laughter. Mozart and Goethe can laugh at themselves. They can laugh at the world, and they don't have to take it so seriously. Harry Haller hates modern music. He thinks it's stupid. But Mozart doesn't really give a hoot. Mozart realizes that it's all music, right? That it's not so serious as there's this one type of music that is the true music, but that all these things can be true. All these things can be allowed, can be permitted, and the way you permit it is through laughter, right? And this is sort of the final word of the novel. Harry Haller has this inability to laugh. This inability to laugh at himself, to laugh at others. Everything is so serious. Everything is serious and has to mean something important and has to relate to his conception of himself. He's stuck. He's stuck in the ego. So I think this provides an interesting contrast with Demian. That Demian is an exploration to get to the ego. That he wants to understand himself as an individual person. Whereas Steppenwolf is an attempt for someone to break free from their ego, break free from their individuality, and be part of something else, be part of reality, be part of eternity. And so this is the false duality of the Steppenwolf. This inability to understand the multitude that is contained within you, as Walt Whitman said. I contain multitudes. So that has been that. Highly recommend these two novels, Demian and Steppenwolf by Herman Hesse. Herman Hesse, he's one of my favorite authors, and it took me a little while to sort of get into him. I don't think his reputation is so good nowadays. If people have even heard of him, I have a very poor understanding of what people even know about things. I've actually seen some people, especially young people, read Demian and not enjoy it at all. And to be honest, I didn't love it the first time I read it. I thought I don't know, I thought it was a bit shallow and kind of trite. But when I read it the second time, I found it made a lot more sense, and the more I thought about it, the more I got out of it. And I think that's always a sign of a good book. The more you think about it, the more you get out of it. And like I said, a great book will have a central ambiguity, a thing that you can't quite grab onto, you can't quite put perfectly into words, that you have to continually circle around over and over, and continually can glean more and more from it. And I think Demian certainly has that, and I think Steppenwolf certainly has that. Novels that you can read over and over again and always find some new understanding within it. And this is a great thing. And this is one of the beautiful things about literature. And this is why we're here in my Pleasure Dome to talk about it. So, there you go. Goodbye.